Hi Cree, Malita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my April wrap-up. So, I don't know about you, but these months this year feel like they're taking forever, but at the same time have been going by so quickly. Like, I am so shocked that it's May now. I couldn't really tell you what happened in April. I worked. I didn't think I read that much, but turns out I read 9 books, which I'm kind of surprised about. I still would have been happy if I only read 2 or 3, but I at one point I thought I was kind of resigned to going, okay, yeah, that's all I'm going to read this month. But lo and behold, so the only one you should be comparing yourself to is you. If you read 1, 2, 50 books, whatever, then good on you. So long as you're doing what you're doing and you like doing it. Yeah, let's go ahead and just get right into my stat. Like I said, I read 9 books for the month of April, which was 2,697 pages and 69.42 hours. I do count the audiobooks I listen to as read because a book is a book is a book. I also count their pages. I do not count the physical books I read in terms of hours because no, I don't want to do the math. Let's see. So sources, I have 6 audiobooks, 3 physical. I have formats, 1 graphic novel, 8 novels, sorry. In terms of audience, I have 7 adults, 1 children's, and 1 YA. For ratings, I have 0 1 star, 0 2 stars, 1 3 star, 1 3.5 star, 1 4 star, 5 4.5 stars, and 1 5 star. And then that gives the month of April an average rating of 4.2. And then for genres, I have 2 contemporary, 2 fantasy, 3 horror, 1 mystery, and 1 nonfiction. I also have 1 DNF, which I don't count in my stats just because I don't count it as read. Even it doesn't matter when I DNF'd it at. To me, it's not completed, so I didn't completely read it. If you do it differently, that's completely fine. This is just the way I do it. So, I also participated in the Magical Readathon. This is a readathon a bi-yearly readathon it happens twice a year. For April, it was the spring equinox. This is an RPG type readathon where we get to create our characters. We are going to Aurelium, which is a magical school, and we're cooking. We are choosing our career paths, and we take classes based on that career path. So I chose Wild Form Druid. I will leave Olive G, who's the host of this readathon, and their information as well as the announcement video down in the description down below if you ever want to check it out, because I highly suggest you do. They explain it a whole lot better than I can. I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about my DNF real quick. So that was The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is following Alex, who wants to be a writer. She's all but given up on her dream of becoming a writer and meeting her idol author works in publishing. But then one day a friend ends up contacting her, letting her know that she has been chosen for a writing retreat that this author is hosting. That's great news. Bad news is that her best friend turned enemy is also going. So at the writing retreat, and this best-selling author that is hosting it, the author turns out to be a little unhinged. Weird things are happening in the estate that she lives in, that is hosting this writing retreat. Things are getting real weird. So that's all I really knew going into this, and ultimately by the halfway point I didn't care to know what was going to happen. So ultimately I felt that Alex was just kind of petty and didn't connect with her. I kind of want to connect with my protagonists in the book. I know that's not everyone's different on that, but I particularly need to connect with them. I felt like Alex was kind of petty. I felt like I didn't care about anything that was going on. There was this mysterious backstory of what happened between her and her best friend and what happened, and because everyone kind of made it seem like an accident, but Alex tends to think that she did it on purpose. but isn't outright like speaking about it. There was also a moment in here where we were meeting other folks in the writing retreat, not necessarily like the best friend turned enemy, but there was like, I think there was supposed to be like 4 people in total, and it turns out to be 5, because both Alex and her best friend turned enemy were like an exception, and at that point they were just hoping to get get someone. So there's 3 other writers at this writing retreat, and when they're doing introductions, it felt weird to me, because it felt like I get that they were introductions, I get that we were learning more about them, but it ultimately felt like an excuse for Julia Barnes to go, there's your diversity, let's move on. So we met one of them who is a lesbian, and then she ends up asking where everyone's family's from. The one person of color that was that got onto this writing retreat, like her family didn't purposely move to the United States. They were slaves, and it was mentioned that that's an awkward conversation, and they quickly moved on. And then they started talking about pronouns, and then and Alex goes on like a mental tangent about how the publishing industry is so terrible, and how it was weird that she thought her boss made them do the pronouns in every meeting, when she didn't hire diversely at all. So it was just like little comments that felt like we were just getting it all out of the way, and then we were moving on, as opposed to being more integrated within the story itself. Not that I would know the whole story, because like I said, I pretty much DNF'd it at the halfway point. We still weren't really into it. They had just started. In all reality, it was like the first day of the writing retreat. It felt like it took forever to get through a writing retreat in general. And then once we were there, like some odd things started happening by the halfway point. Like I said, I couldn't get myself to care. I felt like this was putting me in a reading slump. I don't know. So this was supposed to be my match my clothes color to the cover of the book pick. Obviously I DNF'd it, so it didn't work for that particular. I do have a replacement for that prompt. The first book that I did complete in the month of April was Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This was read in what I call the in-between time. I call it the in-between time. It's like when it's not quite enough time for me to finish any leftover books on my previous month's TBR before it becomes the next month, but I don't necessarily want to read a book from the following month's TBR in case I get it done in in the month that we're in. So I picked up Watch Over Me, which was not on either TBR. I just kind of picked it up. This is following Mila, who is aging out of the foster care system. She ends up getting an internship at a farm with a couple that fosters children. They foster like 8 or 9 children, and they have 3 interns that live on the farm with them in cabins, and these interns help with the farm as well as with the kids. They homeschool these kids. So Mila is charged with homeschooling like the middle school section. It's not quite little kids, but it's not quite high schoolers. And she only has one student, Lee, who is also a new member of this family. And ultimately Mila is connecting with Lee because they're the two newest ones. There's also ghosts on this farm, quite literally. But these ghosts are also, there's more ghosts that are haunting Mila. Her past, how she ended up getting into the foster care system to begin with. I've heard that Nina LaCour is really good at writing that feeling of being alone, and I would hesitate to agree. I think in my blog I said I agreed, but like thinking about it now, because my critique of this book is that I wanted more. It could have been longer, in my opinion. There were moments where, yes, we were getting that alone type thing, but it felt like Mila was putting it upon herself, because it felt like just a cause, an effect of trauma, in that she didn't feel like she deserved love, so she was pulling away. She also felt like she was being lied to, and she felt like she was being deceived. Rather than try to talk to people about it, she kind of just self-isolated. So it felt very like she caused it herself, and she then felt very alone from everybody. But I didn't feel like there was much of a connection with everybody to necessarily care, if that makes sense. So like I wanted more of that connection. We get the impression that she was starting to feel a little more welcome, but it still felt distance to me. So when she was self-isolating and feeling alone, it was alone, like a loneliness, but like I didn't feel the hurt could have been there if she had made these friends and felt a real connection with them. I was feeling welcome for the first time in a long time, and then suddenly that felt ripped away. I didn't feel that. I also felt like it could have been creepier in a way. Not that the ghosts on the farm themselves should be creepy. I was just kind of expecting more from this. I think I originally put this at a 4.5, and I'm thinking I'm going to lower it down to a 4. I would say that this book did make me think, and it had me annotate for some reason. I have never annotated a book before, but I annotated this one. No tabs, just random annotations and highlights every now and then. So I don't know what that says. And at one point, I will admit that this book, there were moments in here that made me miss my grandparents, because Mila does talk about her grandparents and ultimately how they were a stable figure in her life for stability, and that stability wasn't there anymore. And so then it made me feel like I needed to contact my grandparents. So it made me miss them. But yeah, ultimately 4 stars. I am interested to see what else Nina LaCour has to offer. I'll scoot a little bit over here so that I can put up my next book that I read, and that was Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik. This I listened to via audio through Libro, which I have an affiliate link down below if you ever want to check them out. Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik. This is not narrated by Simon Vance. This is the second book in the Temeraire series. Basically, we are following Captain William Lawrence, who is the captain of a ship in the British Royal Navy. This is during the Napoleonic era. This is a historical fantasy, so we're going through the Napoleonic Wars, but add in dragons. So Captain William Lawrence ends up capturing a French frigate. There's a dragon egg on there. The British Royal Navy and the Air Force don't necessarily see eye to eye, and there's a lot of secrets being kept from both, particularly when it comes to the dragons. No one on William Lawrence's ship is really willing to or wanting to try to harness this dragon, because it is about to hatch, because that would mean they can no longer be in the Navy. They would have to go to the Air Force. So the dragon hatches. The guy who was supposed to harness the dragon wasn't able to, because ultimately the dragons are intelligent even before hatching, and the dragon ends up going and letting Captain William Lawrence, harnessing him, is no longer the captain of a ship but a captain of a dragon, and ends up having to go into the British Royal Air Force to learn how to be a dragon rider. And the first book was kind of exploring that and what that means and what that entails. And I was warned that the second book, The Throne of Jade, was going to be a bit slower. I love first books in a series because it's that introduction to the world of like opening up to us and seeing all these new details and what's different. And I felt like the second book was really no different. We really just kind of explored more of the world. Like quite literally, we are going to a different country and learning how another culture treats their dragons comparably to the British. So it was really fun. There was some slower moments, so I would say that I would give this a 4.5, 4.75 if I'm being real picky about it. But I still really enjoyed it. I still thought that it was hilarious. I love Simon Vance's narration. I've been comparing him to David Attenborough, but that's like just the baseline. His baseline like narration of being a narrator, but his characters are really fantastic. Each one is its own unique character. I can definitely tell the difference between like Captain Lawrence as well as Temeraire, who is the dragon that he ended up harnessing. So yeah, I'm still really excited about this series. I'm still hoping to try to get through it. I'm reading the third one in May at some point. So yeah, I'm still really excited about this. This book also fulfilled the prompt for my wild form druid for, which one was it? I think it was Conjuration, which I believe was a book recommended by a friend. This series was ultimately recommended to me by a friend that used to work with me. So I'm glad I'm finally able to get to it. The next book that I read was A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is my second T. Kingfisher. I was a little nervous getting into this because ultimately I did have read another T. Kingfisher, and that is What Moves the Dead. But for some reason I keep thinking of that one as like an outlier because it's a retelling of The House of Usher. And so I wasn't sure how I'd feel about T. Kingfisher's work normally. So when this wasn't originally on my TBR, but I did replace Garden of Earthly Bodies because after reading that, it just made me real nervous about the book itself because I am not a body horror fan. So it just made me real nervous, and so rather than reading Garden of Earthly Bodies, I realized that this one had just come out. It was available through Libro as an audiobook, and so I listened to it. This one is following Sam, who's an anthropological entomologist. So she is fascinated by bugs, particularly dead bugs that are in anthropology dig sites. So she's on her way to one of those dig sites when the dig site is halted because of human remains. She then ends up going to South Carolina and visits her mom, and feels like it's a good time to do so because she's been getting calls recently from her brother who is concerned about their mom. He says that she's been acting weird. Just little things that Sam didn't really put any real worry into. Losing a little bit of weight, acting a little funny. She wasn't thinking too much of it, but then she gets to her mom's house and realizes, oh, there's bits of her mom's house that have changed and like reverted back to something that Sam hasn't seen in a real long time. Her mom has lost a lot of weight and is acting real funny. She's choosing her words carefully. She's misremembering things and insisting that Sam is misremembering them herself. And she's just acting odd. She's ultimately just being odd, and Sam's concerned, and soon Sam's realizing that it's more than just her mom, it's the house itself. I love this. I forget who's the narrator. Mary Robinette Kowal. I thought they did a really good job. I love Sam as a character and as a protagonist because I thought she was just ultimately funny. Some of her commentary was just lighthearted and fun. Basically, I wasn't even done with this book yet and had gone to my local bookstore and ordered it. So I do have a full review up on this if you want to go check it out. I did talk about more about what some of the elements that I thought needed to be addressed were. So yeah, ultimately though, I really enjoyed this, and it replaced Garden of Earthly Bodies in terms of my Pokemon TBR prompts, but it also replaced Botanical Curses and Poisons, The Shadow Lives of Plants by Fez Inkwright when it came to my magical readathon prompt of reading a book with flowers on the cover. There is a floral wallpaper on this book. I am still interested in Botanical Curses and Poisons. I just wasn't able to get to it, so it's going back on the pile. The next, sorry, I don't know what's happening to my voice there. The next book that I read was Murder Your Employer, McMaster's Guide to Homicide by Rupert Holmes, narrated by Sam Vance and Neil Patrick Harris. This was also an audiobook that I got from Libro, and ultimately I was like kind of excited for this book. I hadn't heard much about it, but I sounded really interesting, and ultimately we are following, I have to look it up because I don't remember the characters. Does it even say the characters within the summary? So basically, this is a school. The McMaster's is a school that teaches folks how to commit a homicide without being caught. No, it's not for serial murderers. It's not. It's basically just there to help. Like, there's rules set into place, and we are ultimately following one character in particular, who I believe his name is Clark. Played by Neil Patrick Harris. And I believe this is also historical fiction because it didn't feel contemporary. But basically, Clark is mad at his employer. I'm pretty sure he's an engineer. He created this airplane format, and that's how the airplane was supposed to be built, but his employer ended up making shortcuts to cut costs, and ultimately that shortcut can lead to people dying and ultimately the plane crashing. When Clark found out about it, he was fired and actually humiliated to the point where he wouldn't be able to find any other employer. Like his reputation was shot. There were other things that happened as well that ultimately made Clark decide that his employer needed to die. And so he set up a plan to try to kill him, only to get found out. And ultimately Clark was taken to this secret school, McMaster's, to be taught how to properly kill someone, and to really go through the rules and decide if he actually wanted to kill this person. I thought it was really interesting. We get two other perspectives as well, but it makes me curious. The two other perspectives were of women, and it just ultimately made me curious because we only get Neil Patrick Harris as the narrator for Clark, but we also get these two other perspectives as well, but it's more of a this reads more as a like biography of the school and these three students that happen to go through there, but we didn't get any specific narrator for the women, so I don't know if it was trying to be like crafted in the style of if it was a historical fiction and they wouldn't have bothered. I don't know. It was just something about it like bugged me because we didn't get like two other actresses to play these characters. We got Clark's diary as he went to the school. Why wouldn't we have gotten the diary of these two women who also went to the school? Yeah, that part for some reason it just bothered me. But ultimately it was interesting. It was kind of like lackluster. I don't know. It was just like, I feel like it was pretty forgettable considering I don't remember any of the characters' names. I don't know. It was just kind of disappointing. I'm thankful that I didn't buy a physical copy, but I did suggest it for my library to buy it, and I noticed that they bought it, so I don't know. Maybe it'll be something someone will enjoy later on, but I found it pretty mediocre. Worked for the target length of 289 to 415 pages. This book was exactly 289 pages, and I believe it was like a grass type Pokemon that had me pick it because there's I remember there being roses on the cover, and that was why I picked it. The next book that I read was Ghostland, An American History in Haunted Places by Colin Dickey. This I also listened to, and if that tells you anything about why I have a physical copy. There's only blurbs on the back. Hold on. Sorry, my camera stopped recording. I don't know when, so I'm just going to restart that whole thing. Colin is on the trail of American ghosts. Crammed into old houses and hotels, abandoned prisons and empty hospitals, the spirits that linger continue to capture our collective imagination. But why? His own fascination piqued by a house hunt in Los Angeles that revealed derelict foreclosures and zombie homes, Dickey embarks on a journey across the continental United States to decode and unpack the American history repressed in our most famous haunted places. Some have established a reputation as the most haunted mansion in America or the most haunted prisons. Others, like the haunted Indian burial ground in West Virginia, evoke memories from the past our collective nation tries to forget. With boundless curiosity, Dickey conjures the dead by focusing on questions of the living. How do we, the living, deal with stories about ghosts? And how do we inhabit and move through spaces that have been deemed, for whatever reason, haunted? Paying attention not only to the true facts behind a ghost story, but also the ways in which changes to those facts are made, and why those changes are made. Dickey paints a version of American history left out of the textbooks, one of the things left undone, crimes left unsolved. Spellbinding, scary, and wickedly insightful, Ghostland discovers the past we're most afraid to speak out loud. In the bright light of day is the same past that tends to linger in the ghost stories we whisper in the dark. I loved this book. I thought it was really introspective. There were histories that Dickey talks about, as it said. He goes through multiple haunted places and just kind of explains why the haunted stories were exaggerated or changed to fit some kind of narrative that people wanted to portray. I liked it. It really cleared off some of the dust of the stories that were being told. I also enjoyed the fact that Dickey went over the issues with the Indian burial ground trope, as well as some of the Southern ghost stories that ultimately were the Ku Klux Klan trying to scare black folks into not leaving for the North. I really liked it. I'm trying to think, is this the one I gave 5 stars or is this the one I gave 4.5? Let's see. So this one was narrated by John Lindstrom, and yes, this is the one I gave 5 stars. So I thought it was really enjoyable. I highly suggest it. Yeah, this is another one where as soon as I was done reading it, I bought the physical copy. Writing Retreat was supposed to be my match color to my clothing colors to my cover of the book. Because I didn't finish and I ultimately DNF'd the Writing Retreat, I ended up replacing it with Ghostland. I'm not wearing black now. I am wearing this gray color though, so that works. But most of the time I am typically wearing black. So when I picked this up, I was wearing black. So I'm counting that. And then in April, it was Earth Day. And on Earth Day, I decided to read Once Upon a Forest by Pam Fong. This is a children's book. And I think it was cataloged in my own reading my book tracker as a graphic novel. But it didn't have, would it be a novella? I don't understand. So this is ultimately a children's book that is following this little guy as they are trying to regrow a forest after a fire destroys it. This one has no words. It's just strictly illustration. And ultimately, I found the illustration really cute. I found that this was very appropriate for Earth Day. But what I wanted really was because it made it seem like it was a wildfire that destroyed the forest. So I was thinking like, oh, a large swath of forest was destroyed. It was like 3 trees. And so this little, I think it's a bear. I'm not sure what it is. Beaver? What is it? It's a marmot. Basically go to replace those 3 trees and replace it with 3 new saplings. Which is fine and all, and I understand that. But I had some concerns, mostly that, like, yes, I get that wildfires are dangerous, but I mean, as our local area is trying to really push for prescribed fire, particularly with our Indigenous folks, and trying and making partnerships with BLM and state parks and even private property owners to be able to do prescribed burns so that wildfires aren't as dangerous. I also felt like it was very odd that they called it a wildfire when it was 3 trees. I get that. I don't know if there's a a limitation necessarily on what deems a wildfire, but I also thought it would be helpful if it was in fact a wildfire, like it burned a lot more than just 3 trees, and the marmot got help from others in the forest community to be able to plant more trees. I don't know, that was just kind of my thought. Ultimately, I think I gave this like 4 stars, but that's my thought of where I want it to go. I get that it's only a children's book. I am not the demographic. Maybe I should create my own children's book, but ultimately that's what I thought about this. So, okay. The next book that I read was The Adventures of Amina AlSarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, or S.A. Chakraborty. This is narrated by Lamise Isaac and Amin El Gamal. I was really pleasantly surprised with this one, so I don't know why I was hesitant. Large fantasy books tend to intimidate me, and it was just, I don't know. It's also one that I think is getting a lot of hype, and when a book gets a lot of hype, I feel like it's going to get overhyped and I'm not going to like it as much. This one I really did enjoy. Okay, so Amina AlSarafi should be content. After a storied and scandalous career as one of the Indian Ocean's most notorious pirates, she survived backstabbing rogues, vengeful merchant princes, several husbands, and one actual demon to retire peacefully with her family to a life of piety, motherhood, and absolutely nothing that hints of the supernatural. But when she's tracked down by the obscenely wealthy mother of a former crewman, she's offered a job no bandit could refuse: retrieve her comrade's kidnapped daughter for a kingly sum. The chance to have one last adventure with her crew, do right by an old friend, and win a fortune that will secure her family's future forever. It seems like such an obvious choice that it must be God's will. Yet the deeper Amina dives, the more it becomes alarmingly clear there's more to this job and the girl's disappearance than she was led to believe. For there's always a risk in wanting to become a legend, to seize one last chance at glory, to savor just a bit more power, and the price might be your very soul. I loved this. So I gave it 4.5. There was like a couple elements that kind of took me out of it, and I think it was just a little too fantastical. It was just hard for me to imagine, really. And maybe that's just because I am not sure. I don't know. I couldn't quite grasp it. Though it was really interesting and actually kind of funny. So 4.5. Yeah, I really thought it was fun. It definitely, I think, I'm sorry, my thing with names for some reason is like going out the window. Steph from Stephanie Bookish had mentioned that this is very much giving Pirate of the Caribbean vibes, and I would kind of agree. I would have to agree, but put it in the Indian Ocean. I immediately wanted a physical copy. I have one on its way, which I'm really excited about, mostly because it's one of the, is it the Fairy Loot? I think it's the Fairy Loot one. I wanted it. So I'm really excited for it because there is a map, and I think that would have been really helpful for me to have on hand. It would have been great. So, but I really liked it. It was really fun. It was really, the fact that Amina is an older protagonist and is complaining about like knee problems and just having to get back into it, how you know, there's I don't think we have very many older protagonists much anymore, and the fact that her whole crew was kind of on the older age was very interesting. I loved some of her side characters. They made it. I can't remember their names right now. And I knew I would have this problem because it's names that I'm not used to saying, and I can almost form them in my head, but I know I'm going to say them wrong, so I don't want to. But her poisoner, hilarious. Loved her. The demon, fantastic. Loved him. So there was such character building throughout this whole thing. Each character felt unique and interesting, and I loved it. And the fact everything just made sense to me, and the fact that I was a little nervous because I knew that Amina was religious. She is Muslim. I don't know much to anything about the Muslim religion, but I mean, it was very, I don't know, it was refreshing because Amina was so, like, she talked about her religion and talked about her practices and talked about her other, talked about her crew's practices and how not all of them are Muslim, but she's, I mean, that's fair. So long as they respect her, she'll respect them. And it made sense. It was just really nice. And I'm like, oh, okay. It was great. And we had a gay side character. We had someone who was questioning their gender. Yeah, it was just really pleasant. And I'm realizing more and more how much I like non-Western fantasy. So I say that, and it feels like anytime I say that, though, it's like capturing Native American fantasy and like into that. And what I mean by that is not what I mean by it is non-white based fantasy. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I know it fulfilled some a water Pokemon prompts, but for Aurelium it didn't. Okay. The next book that I read was Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This was one of the books that I chose as a free pick for my reading 23 of in 2023. I keep debating, going back and forth, if I want to give this its own review. I don't think I will, just because I definitely have to be in a mood for that, and I'm going to be talking about it anyway in the vlog that I have for this. Not that I have much footage of that, but I talk about it more in my vlog, which will be out at some point. But in this book, we are following Mackenzie, who used to live in the High Prairie with her family. After her kokum died, she moved to Vancouver. for various reasons. Shortly after she moves to Vancouver, her sister dies, and she doesn't go back. But after almost a year later, she starts having dreams, and these dreams seem very, very real to her, and we fall right into it, where she wakes up after having a dream where she is ripping the head off a crow, and wakes up to that crow head still in her hand, and she feels that the puncture where the beak was in her hand. Night after night, Mackenzie's dreams return her to a memory from before her sister Sabrina's untimely death, a weekend at the family's lakefront campsite, long obscured by a fog of guilt. But when the waking world starts closing in too, a murder of crows stalks her around the city. She emerges retching water from a nightmare of drowning, and she gets threatening text messages from someone claiming to be Sabrina. Mackenzie knows this is more than she can handle alone. Traveling north through her rural hometown in Alberta, she finds her family still grappling with the same grief she ran away to Vancouver to escape. They welcome her back, but their shaky reunion only seems to intensify her dreams and make them more dangerous. What really happened that night at the lake, and what did it have to do with Sabrina's death? Only a bad Cree would put their family at risk. But what if whatever has been calling Mackenzie home was within her all along? I will say this took me what felt like forever to read it. Not because I didn't necessarily... It felt kind of meandering until about the halfway point. It was really very slow. We get some answer, it felt like it took forever for Mackenzie to realize that she couldn't be in Vancouver, that she had to go back to Alberta, to the high prairie. When she gets back, I kind of expected it to pick up a little bit and get some answers, but no, we get more nightmares, and she's ultimately keeping secrets from her family. So it was just kind of like, there was multiple times where I was just like, I almost DNF'd this. I kept thinking about it, but there was something about it that pulled me further. And one night, I just kind of picked it up again and read it all the way through. And as soon as I was done, I was bawling. I was trying not to hyperventilate. I was crying so hard because it got real intense real quickly. There's definitely grief and loss, particularly over a sister as well as a family member. There are multiple topics in here that are worth discussing. MMIP, the effects of oil booms in a town and what happens when that oil boom is gone, how that affects the town. Yeah, there was a lot. And particularly what got me was when Mackenzie finally did open up to her family, particularly her remaining sister, who was the other sister's twin. We get that grief and loss from both of them. We get that connection as they go through the grief of losing their sister. And that was to me, affected me. But we also get, it felt very vulnerable in terms of, we're also talking about dreams. Dreams can also be a very personal thing. I know that I've had dreams that have had me waking up gasping and crying and made me scared to go back to sleep, as well as made me question if I really wanted to go back to sleep. This book made me afraid to go to sleep out of fear I wouldn't wake up again, which I've had before without having to read a book. But it hit a certain way, particularly the last bit of the book. Was just intense, and I would have given this probably a 2.5, 3 star at the beginning, and towards the end I can't quite give it a 5 just because of how it made me feel at the beginning, but would definitely give it a 4.5. So it was a lot. But I'm glad I pulled through it. I'm glad I finished it. This one, did it have any prompts? Yes. So this one was flip a coin. If it lands on heads, I had to read a nonfiction. If it landed on tails, I had to read a fiction, and it landed on tails. This was the one I chose for it. So that's that. This also worked for the Buzzwordathon in terms of picking an emotion. Bad Cree. I think feeling bad is an emotion, but feeling like you're a bad Indigenous person or a bad member of your family, or that was very much felt like the central theme to this. So yeah, I think that works really well. The last book that I read for the month was an odd one. I will say that. This was Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy A. Snyder. It was on sale on Libro and I decided to check it out, and I knew I didn't have it on my TBR. And it was definitely like the monthly in-between moment of like April wasn't quite done but May hadn't started, and I didn't really necessarily want to start on a May TBR pick. Yeah. So, to survive, they must evolve. A virus tears through the globe, transforming its victims in nightmarish ways. As the world collapses, dark forces pull a small group of women together. Erin, once quiet and closeted, acquires an appetite for a woman and her brain. Why does forbidden fruit taste so good? Savannah, a professional BDSM switch, discovers a new turn-on, committing brutal murders for her eldritch masters. Mareva, plagued with chronic tumors, is too horrified to acknowledge her divine role in the coming apocalypse. And as her growths multiply, so too does her desperation. This was apparently inspired by her Bram Stoker award-winning story, Amygdala. This is like pandemic meets apocalyptic meets cosmic otherworldliness. It was not what I was expecting, and there were multiple moments where I could not have this audiobook going as on speaker out loud. It was interesting. It was definitely thought-provoking. It was a little too weird for me. There was mostly because like body horror all the way. I don't like body horror. But it didn't give me that when I was reading the synopsis. So yeah, who is this narrated by? I think it was narrated by 3 different people. Yeah, it was, I'm sorry, I can't see all their names. Let me go to another one. This is narrated by Ariel Delisle, Catherine Luttrell, and Lindsay Dorcas. But yeah, it was, I mean, there were some topics and like there were some discussion topics that I thought were really interesting that ended up getting brought up. Now we do have a sapphic romance of sorts in here, but like the topics of interest in particular were like questioning what a woman does for a career, and immediately going, well, what would your father think about this? When in this particular case, like, who cares what the father thought about it? And ultimately, who cares in general what my father thinks about my career? I am my own individual person. I don't need the approval of my father to do what I do. So it was very, like, there was very feminist-centric themes to this, but I also feel like this was very white feminist. In a way, all 3 of our characters are white, and at one point, one ends up contemplating, not even contemplating, she ends up getting haunted by a ghost of a black woman that she kills, and questioning and getting called out for the racism. So it's, and she ultimately, like, accepts it as, yes, I'm selfish. So it was really interesting but ultimately uncomfortable. What did I rate this as? I think this was my 3 for the month. I would have to lower it to a 2.5. Like I said, it was something that enticed some interesting thoughts, but ultimately left me overall uncomfortable with the body horror, with the horror in general, and with some of the topics, it was just, yeah, no, this book was not for me. And I think I ended up going ahead and switching out one of the prompts for this. Yes, so I ended up switching out The Keeper 6 for 2-letter E's in the title, for the Magical Readathon prompt. So yeah, these are the books that I read for the month of April. I do have, so like the Keeper 6 has been rolled over to May, so and I don't have the physical book with me. It's somewhere else because I am currently reading it. Was not able to get to Wolf by Wolf, and I had tried starting The Heart Principle and ultimately ended up putting it back down. Not that I'm not interested in it, I was just reading another romance at the time, and it was just too much romance at a time. So I'm hoping to pick it up again in the future, just not now. Is what I read for April. If you read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. If you made it this far, thank you for enduring. I know that these can be long. Let's go ahead and put the skull and crossbones emoji because I'm still thinking about Sister Maiden Monster, and I just nope. Otherwise, be sure to like this video. I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will see you in another video very soon. Cheers.